Let's talk about how to knit sturdy, long-lasting socks with all-natural sock yarn today. So, no superwash, no nylon, no synthetic content whatsoever, only wool and other natural materials. Is that even possible? Yes, it is, and I am going to share my best tips and tricks with you today. I have also written a free guide all about knitting socks with all-natural sock yarn, and you can download it for free if you like. I'm going to link it for you in the description box. Let's get started. Nowadays, the standard sock yarn is a blend of a wool, usually merino, together with nylon, and in most cases there is also a superwash treatment on top of that. The nylon is added to increase the stability and longevity of the socks, and the superwash treatments creates the convenience to simply be able to throw the socks into the washing machine along with your other garments. But given the fact that nylon wasn't even invented until 1935, people must have been knitting socks with all natural sock yarn for hundreds and hundreds of years prior to that. So it is definitely possible. But why should we even bother with this? Nylon is a class of a synthetic polymer, which is in fact plastic. So if you add nylon to a wool yarn, this means that it is not biodegradable anymore, especially if you add a superwash treatment on top of it. If you do a superwash treatment, you basically remove the scales of the wool fibers. This prevents the wool from felting, which is convenient, but on the other hand, it also makes it lose some of its amazing properties. So it basically gets covered in plastic, and this means it is not biodegradable anymore. So if you are someone who cares about the environment and sustainability, I can only highly recommend that you give knitting socks with all natural sock yarn a try. Alright, let's assume you are convinced by now to give knitting socks with all natural sock yarn a try. On to the tips. My first tip relates to the gauge of the fabric. So if you want to create a sturdy sock, you should knit the socks at a very tight gauge. Let's have a look at an example. So this is a skein of yarn from my Etsy shop, and this is my Luster Sock Decay base, a 100% German merino wool yarn. And this is how it looks. I naturally dyed this one myself using logwood, but I wanted to talk about the gauge. So the yardage for a 100 gram skein of yarn is 250 meter, which corresponds to 273 yards. When I knit socks with this base, I usually use a 2mm needle, which corresponds to a US 0. Now, this might sound like a very small needle size because it is, and it does create a very tight fabric. But this also means that the socks that I get from this yarn are very sturdy and they last for a very long time. So you will definitely have to experiment a bit and see for yourself how small of a needle size you can use in order to still be comfortable while knitting. But I highly encourage you to try to knit your socks at a tighter gauge if you want them to last a bit longer. Tip number 2 has to do with how the yarn is spun. Not all yarns are suitable for knitting socks with them. When it comes to sock yarn, you either want to go with a yarn with a very high twist or a yarn that has multiple strands plied together. Let's have a look at an example. So this is another one of my own sock yarn bases. This is the Classic Sock Decay, another 100% German merino wool yarn. And I'm going to give you a closer look. The yarn is created by spinning the shorter and longer fibers together into one strand, and then you have 3 of those strands plied together into a 3-ply, which makes for a sturdy pair of socks. And let's have a look again at the Luster Sock Decay. I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell how many plies there are in this yarn. Probably not. So this is an 8-ply yarn, and this also makes for a very sturdy yarn, and the plies add enough stability to be able to knit a pair of socks with this yarn without getting any holes easily, although it is only wool. Tip number 3 is all about fiber content. Choosing the right fiber for your sock knitting project is crucial, and there are a number of different options to choose from. First, we'll have to differentiate between protein fibers like wool from sheep, alpaca, goats, camels, yaks. There's also silk, mohair, you name it. And on the other hand, we have the cellulose fibers or plant-based fibers like cotton, linen, hemp, rami, for example. When it comes to wool yarn, not all sheep produce the same kind of wool. In fact, they can look very different. And if you look at sheep like Blue-faced Leicester or Wensleydale, for example, who have very long staple lengths, so the single fibers are rather long compared to a merino sheep, which has a shorter staple length, you will find that the sheep breeds with a longer staple length produce sturdier yarns. So these would be more suited for a sock yarn. Silk is another great protein fiber that makes for a great addition to a sock yarn. It is extremely sturdy and can absorb moisture really well, and it is produced by silkworms. And there's also mohair, which comes from the Angora goat, which is another awesome sturdy fiber. It also keeps you very warm. And if you add it to a sock like this one, it will create this fuzzy halo like this. So this is one of my own pairs of socks. This is the Camare socks knitting pattern that I designed myself, and I knitted it with a strand of a silk mohair from Drops Air, and the main color is my Luster Sock Decay yarn in a soft rose colorway called Ballerina. And I absolutely love these socks. I knitted them almost a year ago, and I've worn them quite a bit because I love to put them on in the morning after I wake up, and let me show you. There are no holes in them whatsoever. They look really nice and still very fuzzy and cozy. And if you have never tried knitting socks with a strand of a silk mohair before, I can highly encourage you to give it a try. It's awesome. Let's move on to the cellulose fibers. So cotton and linen are two other examples of long-lasting fibers that can absorb moisture really well, but due to their lack of elasticity, a lot of knitters find it a bit more uncomfortable to work with them. That's why you usually find cotton and linen blended into wool yarns rather than a 100% cotton yarn for a pair of socks, but you of course could still do that. And another interesting plant-based option is rami. This is another beautiful natural fiber that adds a lot of strength to a pair of socks. I have not seen a lot of blends of rami in sock yarns so far, but off the top of my head, I know that Ovis etc. has different sock yarn bases that contain rami, and I have worked with a number of them and I can highly recommend them. I'm going to put a link to her shop in the description box for you in case you're interested. And I wanted to show you one more blend of a cellulose fiber with a protein fiber. This is again another sock yarn from my own Etsy shop. This is merino lino, which is a blend of 85% German merino wool and 15% linen, and it is a fingering weight yarn. This is how it looks, and it also makes for a very sturdy sock. Let me show you an example. So this is another one of my own designs. This is the Happiness All Around socks that I also knitted in the merino lino in a speckled colorway called Afterglow. And let me show you. As you can see, there is a bit of wear. I have worn these socks quite a lot, but there are no holes in them, and I absolutely love this sock yarn base. So if you have not tried a sock yarn blend with linen before, I can only recommend that you give it a try and see for yourself. Tip number 4 is felting your socks intentionally. So back in the days, people often knitted their socks a bit too large and then felted them afterwards. So by applying heat and agitation, you can create a felted fabric because the wool fibers are going to, or the scales are going to lock onto each other, and the fabric will get denser and tighter, but this also means that it will get sturdier. I have personally not tried felting my socks yet, but I'm very interested to giving it a try and see how it will come out. I think it will make a very sturdy pair of socks, and I'm looking forward to trying it out in the future. If you have tried felting your socks before, please leave a comment and let me know. I would love to know more about it. Tip number 5 is choose your knitting pattern wisely. So if sturdiness and longevity of the socks is your primary concern, I would choose the knitting pattern accordingly. Great knitting patterns for long-lasting socks contain either color work, slip stitches, or cables, and I would recommend that you stay away from the lacy patterns. Tip number 6 is reinforcing the parts of your socks where you experience breakage most easily. And for a lot of people, this is the heel. So what you can do is that you reinforce the heel by using slip stitches like these, or you can also do an eye of partridge heel where you alternate between slipping and knitting stitches every other row. Another option would be to take a thin cotton thread, the one that you would use for embroidery, and hold it together with your yarn, either for the whole sock or maybe only for the heel or maybe the toe, where a lot of people also experience getting holes most easily. And like I mentioned before, holding together your yarn with a strand of a silk mohair would also reinforce the sock very nicely. And my last tip, tip number 7, is all about washing. So generally speaking, if you wash your garments less frequently and very gently, you will prolong their longevity. If you are a sock knitter, you probably already know that you do not have to wash your wool socks after every wear. Wool has some amazing properties. It is very breathable and can take up a lot of moisture, and it is also stain and odor resistant, so you do not have to wash your wool socks after every wear. And in case you do have to wash them, of course, washing them by hand would be the gentlest option. But personally, I find that if I put my hand knitted socks into the washing machine and that I only run the wool cycle at a low temperature, it usually works out just fine as well. If you use the wool program and then lay them flat to dry afterwards, you are usually good to go. So those are my best tips and tricks when it comes to knitting socks with all natural sock yarn. I'm going to link everything that I talked about in the description box for you, along with some additional links if you are looking for even more information on this topic. And I would love to know about your experiences with knitting with all natural sock yarn, so please share in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!